The question any thinking person has to ask is, after the greatest event in human history that there ever will be, Ma'amad Har Sinai, where the Rebbe Shem revealed himself as much as is possible, right? Ma'amad Har Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself, to the maximum extent that there will ever be in history, right? Even by bias rishon, there was never a revelation like that, right? Right? Everyone heard and saw, the maximum Gilui Elokus possible. So where do you go from there, right? It's like the highest, it's the pinnacle of human experience, and there'll never be another event like it again. Right? So, well, what's the progression? Where do we go from there? Another question that needs to be posed is why wasn't the Torah given in Eretz Yisrael? The Rebbe Shem wanted to give the Torah in the Midbar, and afterwards we go into Eretz Yisrael. Why not give it in Eretz Yisrael? You think it would have been much more apropos. Now, it's a very interesting thing to contemplate. As soon as Ma'amad Har Sinai was over, you could go up to the mountain, even in that door, right? Any place which might have been off limits was the Mishkan, right? It's whatever restrictions there were of movement moved over to the Mishkan. Har Sinai, which had that great revelation, which there wasn't in the Mishkan, it's mutter to go there, right? Or in that same generation. And in the Mishkan also, a place where the Mishkan once stood, right? There's no Isser to go where the Kodesh HaKadoshim might have been, whether it was in Nov, Givon, Shiloh. Right? Only on Har HaBayis, right, there's an Isser afil bizman hazeh, even b'chorbono, that we can't go up there. So what's the pshat? So Har Sinai was mutter immediately, and the Mishkan was only osir also lefi shah where it stood, right? But on Har HaBayis, the isser to go up is isser kors leolam because Shechina in a betela, but it's lashon Rambam because Shechina is not bottle, so the kedushas Har HaBayis is not bottle. So he writes the place up here. But what's the Shechina was nizgala on Har Sinai? Shechina was nizgala every place that the Mishkan stood. But the truth is, it's all merumas in the continuity of the parshas that we read right after Shavuos, right? The pasuk says, "Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilas Yaakov." Everyone knows the famous drush of Chazal: "Al tikrei morasha ela ma'orasa," right? That the Torah, if you're married us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we know that marriage is in two steps. There's erusin. There's also Nisuin, right? So on Erusin, on that level, is Asar al Kol Yama Kehektish, right? So she's an Eishes Ish, right? And anyone who's Baale is a Chi of Skila, right? But she's not mutter to her husband either, right? She's not Sheira Krovelov. If she's married to a Kohen, he can't be Metamet to her if they didn't have Nisuin yet. Then there's the Chuppah, there's the Nisuin, right? There's that added level of intimacy, which the Mekubalim call the difference between or makif and or pnimi, surrounding light, which means she's cut off from all the other men, asra kol yama kehektish, but she doesn't have the intimacy with her husband, right? That's called or pnimi, to internalize that light. That the light is not just separating around her, separating her from all the other men, right? There's the light that he mamish puts into her, right? The or pnimi. And that's the difference between Har Sinai and the Mishkan. When Mishkan is dugmas the chuppah, right? We reach the level of Nisuin, and that's what we read in Parshas Naso, not just miloshin to count, not only miloshin to raise up, but also miloshin Nisuin, right? That we have the parsha of Chanukas HaMishkan, right? So it's a very interesting thing. What's Chanukas HaMishkan? What's chinuch? As opposed to limud, so Rashi says in Parshas Lech Lecha on the pasuk Vayarakas Chanichav. So Rashi says that the tachlis that a person is destined for, Reishis Knisas Adam La Melacha, or the bias, it's beginning of its destiny. That's where the verb chinuch applies. That's why you can have chanoch lanar, Right? Or Chanukah Sabayis, Chanukah Samizbeach. That's what Rashi writes. So the Mefarshim explain that chinuch, as opposed to stam limud, is to internalize. Right? So something gets its destiny instilled within it. Right? And also by chinuch, chanoch lanar al pi darko gam ki yazkin lo yasri mena. What's the connection? How does the pasuk continue? And therefore, when he gets old, he won't stray, because chinuch is not a synonym for limud. Chinuch is a synonym like Chanukas HaMizbeach or Chanukas HaMishkan, that you put the Kedusha into the Kalim and into the bias. It's internalized. So also chinuch is that the Torah is internalized within the Talmud, and that's why Ki Yazkin Lo Yasar Mimeno, never go off the derech, because he's internalized it. And that's the theme of the whole Parshas Naso. Right, aside from Chanukas HaMishkan, right, but we talk about Kedusha being internalized like Nazir. He could make a chalos Kedusha chal on him with his Kabbalas Nazirus, and where does it come off? It comes off from Sota, and Sota is an amazing thing, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed his shame to be nimchak, to make shalom ben ish leishto, and you dig up from the Karka HaMishkan, right, the Mishkan, where the light is internalized, right, you dig up from there, because the Kedusha that there is between man and wife, Zachu Shechina Shuriya Beinehem, right, and Kayadua Shechina is the meter called Shem Shamayim. That's why a Jewish marriage is worth Shem Shamayim, and you can be Mochek Shem Shamayim, the meter of Shechina, to save the marriage, but it also represents the internalization of Kedusha. Right? So that's the further step that there is after Ma'amad Har Sinai, where it was all Besoid Ma'orasa, we became betrothed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but now begins the eternal process of internalizing that light. And that's the theme of Parshas Naso, Chanukah, Chinuch, to take the ore and put it into Kalim. The ore at Har Sinai did not have Kalim to be absorbed into reality. The first Kalim to absorb that Kedusha were the Mishkan. But even the Mishkan only does it Lefi Shah, when the Mishkan is standing. Right? The special Zgula of Eretz Yisrael is that it has Kalim to absorb the Kedusha. Right? And not all Eretz Yisrael equally. The Harabayis in particular could absorb the Or Shechina. That's where there's Kalim to internalize the light. But there is a step in between, and that's Behaaloscha. Because after you've internalized light, so the light, the Or Torah went from Shamayim to Oretz. Right? Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Right? Then we internalize the light. Right? Before we're ready for the next step of going into Eretz Yisrael, which we'll explain in a second, right? You have to first make the light so much a part of you that you could reflect it back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Chidushei Torah. All right? That it has become so part of our life force that it is vital, it is full of vitality and life, that we're mechadish in Torah. And that's Behaaloscha Saneros, right? Aliyah. The Torah initially went from Shamayim to Oretz, and then Lo Bashamayim Hi. And ever since then, now Emes Me'eretz Titzmach, right? The Torah has to go bottom up, as a sign of our having fully internalized. That's be internalized, not just stuff that's retained, but internalized in the manner that it's alive, and in every door and door, we're producing Chidushei Torah, which is befrat in the Torah Sheba'al Peh, because the text we can't change, which Kayadu is Merumas in the Neros HaMa'aracha, and that's Behaaloscha Saneros, that now Torah goes bottom up, that we're Mechadish down here, and Shemayim will fear Ois, Lefi the Psak of, Bezdin Shomata, right? And that's the further step of that. The internalization of Torah has to further progress to being one of innovation. It's so alive within us. Chaye olam nata b'salchenu, ki hem chayenu v'orech yameinu. So it's one with our life. So then, therefore, that life reflects in the Torah. The Torah is alive. Right? And then after Parshas Behaaloscha, we have Parshas Shelach. Because after that, we're finally ready for Eretz Yisrael. Now, an amazing thing to think about. If the Rebbe Shalom promised us that land, right, and it's meant to be ours, so there's two questions. Why did he first give it to the Shiva Amamin? It's first, that famous first Rashi in the Torah, that Bertzono Nasna Lahem, or Bertzono Not Lahem V'Nasna Lanu. Why did he give it to them? He gave it to the Shivas Amamin first. It was theirs originally fair and square, then he took it and gave it to us. But most of all, if it's ours, why do we have to conquer it? Kibush is when something's not yours, so you conquer it, right? This land was promised us, and we have to do kibush, right? Back then, in the day, and Los Lovo, and right now, right now in Los Lovo, it's all going to be B'derech kibush, right? As it is now, as the Nevuah say, it'll be big Bochamas. Why does it have to be B'derech kibush if it's ours anyway? Kibush should be to annex something that's not yours, right? So it's called Eretz Shivas Ha'amamim. It's a Davar Nifali's Boni, right? The land of the 7 nations. Right? The Indian is like this. Chazal divide up the globe into 2 places. There's Oretz and there's Chutz La'aretz. There's 2 places on the globe according to Chazal, right? There's one place that's in, everywhere else is out. So in a Sefer Orach Chochmah, from one of the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, he says something very interesting. Chutz La'aretz doesn't just mean Miloshen Chutz, it also Miloshen Chetzi. It's only half earth. Now, what does he mean? Because we find in the Gemara in Gittin, right, that an amazing thing, right, that when Am Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael, it expands. Like they say, Tur Malka had, if you work out the cheshbon, what the Gemara says in Gittin, had an astronomical amount of people there. So one of the Amoraim said, I went there, won't even hold 600,000 reeds. I said, Bisman, it's called Eretz HaTzvi, and Bisman Shioshveh Aleha, right, it magically expands. We had in the Kodesh, in the Beis HaMikdash, Omdim Tzfufim Umishtachavim Ravachim. And we had perpetually in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Dovazeh Misoros Biyadeinu Miyad Avosenu Ha'aron Eno Min Hamida. Right, the Aron didn't take up space. Right? So the Sfarim explain, particularly in Revised cover, that Eretz Yisrael, like we said before, has kalim to be makabel kedusha satorah that there isn't in Chutz La'aretz, and that's where this extra space comes from. That extra space that magically opens up, just with the Jewish presence there, which is a bechina of Torah because Torah belongs to Kilas Yaakov, right? Or in the Beis HaMikdash, right, where the Lishkas HaGazos, where the Beis Din HaGadol sat, or the Aron, which holds the Torah, holds the Luchos. In all those places, there was this, extra pockets of space opened up. That's Kedusha Satorah, mamish being manifest, right? Chutz La'aretz doesn't have kalim to hold that Kedusha, right? And that's why no extra space will ever open up. If it's crowded into White Shul, it stays crowded into White Shul, right? Maybe not, but you can experiment, right? And that's what the Orach Chochmah says. It's only Chetzi Oretz, right? Because the spiritual dimensions are not Chal in Chutz La'aretz. Now, so it's not just aside from spatially, it's also Gilui Shechina, right? That's where that extra space comes from. It's also Nevuah. So now, theoretically, if the Umasom would make a deal with us like this, leave Eretz Yisrael, we'll give you the rest of the world. You'll have the whole globe, everything, right? All the continents except for Eretz Yisrael. Let's say they cut a deal with us like that. And the halacha could be the law of the land everywhere, across the whole world, except in Eretz Yisrael. What would be? Avodah Zarah would still be alive and thrive. Nevuah will not be restored. There will not be Gilui Shechina, right? And eventually that empire will peter out because Chutz La'aretz doesn't have the kalim to absorb Kedush Sator to make it manifest. Just like there won't be any extra space that opens up over there. There won't be Gilui Shechina manifest there. The Nevuah will not be restored there. Right? Eretz Yisrael was particularly designed, right, for this purpose. This is the place where the Kedusha could be grafted onto. And if whoever controls Eretz Yisrael controls the cosmic balance of the globe, whether the globe is going to have God consciousness and be aware that there's a God, right? And understand Hashem Elokim and that the Torah is emes. Whoever controls Eretz Yisrael is the one who changes the cosmic balance of the global consciousness. Because that's the one place where there's kalim to be makabel that kedusha. But until that time, it's Eretz Shivas Amamim, since that's point center of the globe. So the 7 Amim, stated in Sfarim, are connected the 7 midas that we call Teva, which are connected the 7 weeks of the Omer. All the 7s that we call Teva, that needs fixing and needs elevation to Lamalam and a Teva, it was Eretz Shivas Amamim, right? They occupied it so long as the world was being noed b'derech hateva. right? The Torah was given in a midbar because the midbar is not teva, it's not habitable space, right? The conquest of Am Yisrael going to Eretz Yisrael is to graft Lamala min teva onto teva. And it has to be b'derech kibush because we're conquering the teva, right? It's to conquer teva, and to graft the lamanta, to graft the Ora Torah onto the Anhog of teva. That's the secret. It was given to these 7 nations because Eretz Yisrael is the central hub of reality, right? So now these 7 midas are what now rule in reality until the final tikkun. That's why it was theirs, mamish theirs. Teva rules in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Now you have to come and you have to conquer it and be machnia the teva to be mekabel the or of lamala min teva. And that's why it has to be b'derech kibush, because conquering Eretz Yisrael is really to conquer the whole world and change the cosmic balance for everybody. And that's the final level also in our relationship to Torah. Right? Because when you're living in your echo chamber of the midbar, where all they did was learn Torah, and they only had what to do with each other. So it's easy to internalize the Torah, and it's easy to even be machadish in Torah, because you're not being challenged by any outside force. There's no dissenting view, right? When Moshe Rabbeinu sent the Meraglim to Eretz Yisrael, Parsha Shelach, that's in preparation to make the transition. So now it's like anything. Shlach lecha lida'atcha. Moshe Rabbeinu's midah is das, right? Das Torah, right? And he wanted to make the bridge to merge das Torah onto that world that had a secular perspective, that was under the shlita of the world order of the Shivas Amnin, right? That experiment failed, right? Because Eretz Yisrael is not niknes, the final conquest. Right? To conquer it, so it's not going to be b'derech das, where you have clarity, and you have yishuv adas. It's going to be b'derech milchama and kibush when there are sveikas, right? When your das is challenged, and you have to come on to emuna, right? Moshe Rabbeinu, as it were, duplicated another form of the chet of Avram Avinu. He asked, "Bama eda ki rashena." Eretz Yisrael is not niknes b'das. Right? Eretz Yisrael's niknes be'emuna, when the das is challenged, because you go into milchama, and you in milchama you have sveikas, right? And you have to face an opposing army, and also it's a culture kampf. It's also a milchemet deyot, right? It's a cultural struggle. You face a dissenting view, and when you're challenged, you need to fall back on emuna, and that's the secret. What the Sfas Emes explains, when Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock and said. Yan lohem mantem bi. So Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't believe in God? No, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't believe in God. He knows there's a God. His midah is das, right? And that's like Avraham Avinu said, B'ma'eda. The final conquest to get Eretz Yisrael is when we have the emunah that's currently being challenged by the woke. And that we have the moral certainty, right? That the Torah is absolute truth, and if the Torah says something's mushchat and something's to'eva, then it is. And if the Torah says Eretz Yisrael belongs to us, it does, right? And no woke scum will tell us, the Amma Torah, what morality is and what truth is and what polite society ought to be. That's the final emunah, with that which will be kovesh Eretz Yisrael.